Hello, this is Broadcasting Scotland. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is our nightly news programme, Scotland at 7, and today it's Monday, the 20th of June. So I'm going to be discussing some of the top stories tonight with Mary McCabe, and I'll introduce you to Mary shortly. But first of all, I'm going to run through the main bullet points from Russia's illegal war with Ukraine, which today is on day 117. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he expects Russia will intensify attacks on Ukraine and possibly other European countries after the EU Commission proposed it as a candidate for EU membership. Ukraine's forces remain on the defensive in the eastern Donbass region, where fighting continues in Severodonetsk. Sergei Haidai, the governor of Luhansk Oblast, said that Russia was massing forces in an attempt to take full control of the city after weeks of fighting, but he maintained that all Russian claims that they control the town are a lie. Russia's blockade of the export of millions of tons of Ukrainian grain is a war crime, according to EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. We'll return to that story in a couple of minutes. Germany says it supports Poland and Romania in adapting their railways to enable the export of millions of tons of grain stuck in Ukraine due to the Russian sea blockade. European Union foreign ministers will discuss ways to free the millions of tons of grain stuck in Ukraine at today's meeting. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia and a long-time ally of Russian President Putin, has posted on Telegram to advise against nuclear negotiations with the US, saying that the relationship between the two countries is at 0 Kelvin, as he put it. The UK Ministry of Defence has said in its latest intelligence report that, in the conflict to date, Russia's Air Force has underperformed. Its failure to consistently deliver air power is likely one of the most important factors behind Russia's very limited campaign success. The war in Ukraine could last for years and will require long-term military support, according to NATO and other Western leaders. A German government source has said that the country is very confident that NATO will successfully reach agreement with Sweden and Finland over their bid for membership, although possibly not in time for the NATO summit in June at the end of this month, in Madrid at the end of June. Australia has sent the first four of 14 armoured personnel carriers to Ukraine as part of a package which is worth about $285 million in US dollars. The M113 SAS-4s were loaded onto Ukrainian aircraft last week after the former Defence Minister Peter Dutton promised the personnel carriers and 20 additional Bushmaster protected infantry vehicles in May. Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov will auction off his Nobel Peace Prize medal later today, pledging the proceeds will go directly to UNICEF in its efforts to help children who have been displaced by the war in Ukraine. The New York Times identified more than 2,000 munitions used by Russian forces in Ukraine, a vast majority of which were unguided. According to the newspaper, over 210 weapons that were identified were of type that have been widely banned under a variety of international treaties. So as we move on to the top story, which is more on the block of Ukraine's grain exports. So first of all, I'll introduce you to my guest tonight, Mary McCabe. Good evening, Mary. I guess you're in the East End of Glasgow. Is that where you are tonight?
Yes, that's exactly where I am, in my attic.
So you're joining us from your writer's attic in Denniston,
yes.
Right? So Mary is a writer and researcher, and is also, I believe, active still in the campaign for independence. You were a member of Pensioners for Indy in the 2014 referendum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's just look a bit more about that story on Russian blockades of the grain, which is stored in silos in Ukraine. So the story says that Russia today denies responsibility for the food crisis, blaming Western sanctions imposed on Moscow that have led to a jump in global food prices and to warnings by the United Nations of hunger in poorer countries that rely heavily on imported grain. As we've said earlier, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, called on Russia to open up the Black Sea routes, crucial for exporting any larger quantity of Ukrainian grain. He said, "One cannot imagine that millions of tons of wheat remain blocked in Ukraine while in the rest of the world people are suffering hunger." He told reporters as he arrived for talks in Luxembourg today and ended by saying this is a real war crime. The EU does support efforts by the United Nations to broker a deal which would resume Ukraine's sea exports in return for facilitating Russian food and fertilizer exports, but that would need the green light from Moscow. Meanwhile, Germany and other countries are working on enabling grain transport via land routes to release at least some of the crop, as the new harvest is now starting, while part of the old harvest is still sitting in silos in Ukraine. Kyiv, or rather the whole of Ukraine, harvested a record 84 million tonnes of grain in clean weight by 2021, and that's up from 65 million the previous year. This year, however, farmers have sown only 14.2 million hectares of spring grain, and that's down from 16.9 million hectares last year because of the Russian invasion, and that's according to Ukraine's Ministry of Agriculture. So, Mary, thanks for joining us tonight. So, first of all, your assessment of Josep Borrell, who used to be the foreign minister of Spain and now has that job for the EU. He describes a blockade of grain as a war crime. Do you think he's correct to put it that way?
Well, yes. War crime is something that's bandied around a lot. I believe there's war crime is one of the things that gets you to The Hague, to the International Criminal Court. Others are things like crimes against humanity. Well, this could also be seen as a crime against humanity because the world is so dependent on Ukrainian bread and grain, and it may not cause starvation in the developed world, but it could cause a famine in the undeveloped world. Famines are far easier to start than they are to end. And well, war crimes, it really looks like Putin's chalking up the war crimes. But of course, having said that, war crimes, the actual politicians who are ever brought to book about war crimes tend to be the ones who are deposed. If you're not deposed, you usually don't have to answer for any war crimes. So to an extent, it's just name calling, really. Maybe that he could be tried in his absence. I don't know whether that would mean anything, but certainly, as far as I remember, all the people who've been up, all the politicians who've been up for war crimes have been deposed ones, like Slobodan Milosevic and of course the Germans after the Second World War. But who knows?
Yes, so in real politics, yeah, to actually go to The Hague and stand trial, you have to either lose a war or be deposed. Yeah, it's just words at the moment.
Yeah.
Now, let's just move on to the substance of this particular dispute, because Russia says that it's all to do with mines, sea mines, which have been placed by Ukraine. Now, Ukraine says on their part that the sea mines are there because they think if we take them away, the Russian Navy will simply attack Odessa, which is presumably one of their targets as they move from the east. And so, well, what do you think of that dispute? Is there anything in the Russian argument that it's Ukraine's fault because they have blockaded their own ports, if you like, by putting mines in them?
There probably is. I mean, if you place mines places, I mean, some of the injuries that have been caused in Ukraine have been caused by landmines that were placed there to stop the Russian tanks. So whenever there's a war, really bad things happen, which could be classed as war crimes on both sides. Obviously, in this case, the assumption of guilt has to go to the body who in the first place invaded a peaceful southern state. Everything else that happens is a consequence of that. But certainly, the sea mines could lie there forever and be yet another war crime when they blow up civilian vessels and so on. There are individual war crimes and there are major war crimes. Invading a sovereign peaceful country is a major war crime. Things that emanate from that are small war crimes, like what soldiers get up to, like that soldier who was recently tried for killing a civilian. Obviously, he's not the only soldier who did that but he was one that got caught. And the soldiers who are up for war crimes are usually the ones who are captured. In fact, they're always the ones who are captured.
Yes, of course, that's quite right. Yeah, the Higgs writ doesn't run in Moscow, so we'll see what happens. So that's going to continue, of course, continued discussions. But what we do know is that both those sea mines and that grain in the silos are really part of the bargaining process of war. As you say, it's one of the things that happens in the war. We'll just move on to our next story, bringing us back to Europe. Now, Labour, we hear today, is ruling out any return to the EU or to free movement of people. It's been reported today that Sir Keir Starmer is planning a speech about immigration which will rule out a Labour government bringing back free movement with Europe. Mr Starmer had previously said that a Labour government would not seek to rejoin the EU under his leadership. Alison Thewlis MP said that the decision to rule out a return to free movement shows that the Labour Party is as bad as the Tories on Brexit, and that Westminster control will continue to harm Scotland's economy and the rights of people in Scotland. Alison Thewlis, who is the SNP Shadow Chancellor, said that free movement across Europe is a key component for growing Scotland's economy, with benefits to businesses, public services, tax receipts and innovation, and that Brexit has cost Scotland billions and worsened the cost of living crisis. This comes as economists warn that Brexit is continuing to have a damaging impact on the economy, with the UK lagging behind the rest of the G7 in pandemic trade recovery. UK business investment trails behind other industrialised countries, and the OECD predicted that the UK will have the slowest growth out of the G20 top nations next year. That's the slowest out of the G20, apart from Russia, which of course is hit by sanctions. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, predicts that Brexit will reduce the UK's economy by around 4% compared to if it had stayed in the EU, and that's the equivalent of about 100 billion a year in lost output. That's 100,000 million. Commenting again, Alison Thewlis, MP for the SNP, said, at a time when Brexit is turbocharging the cost of living crisis and costing Scotland's economy billions of pounds, it beggars belief that Keir Starmer would choose to borrow even more damaging, hard Brexit policies from Boris Johnson. She said this shows the Labour Party is just as bad as the Tories on Brexit, and independence is the only way to protect Scotland's economy and escape the harm of Westminster control. Now, if you don't mind, I'll leave aside the independence argument because obviously that's part of the debate on the referendum. But let's first of all look at Brexit and Labour. I'm interested in your opinion. I'm just using one of the phrases that Alison Thewlis used, that it beggars belief that Sir Keir Starmer is backing the Tories here. Now, it beggars my belief as well. I've just looked up before we came on, Mary, that if you look at the under 30 vote in England, really, well, across the UK, something like 73% of the young voters voted to stay in Europe. So I'm wondering, where is the advantage to Labour? Do they not want young people to vote for them?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's obviously going all out to win some mythological or possibly real group of these red wall people in the north who used to vote for him and have voted Tory last few times around and possibly will again. It's just, it doesn't really beggar belief anymore, I have to say. Labour is clearly wanting to become like the Tories because they reckon in the UK, well, in England, generally they vote Tory more often than they vote Labour. And well, in Keir Starmer's mind, and before him in Tony Blair's mind as well, the way to overcome that is to become like the Tories. I don't really know whether that's true or not, because surely everybody gets tired of the government they've got and they go for an alternative, and they want the alternative to be a wee bit different, you would think. But who knows? I mean, it just seems so sad now that they're putting up the shutters, making this into Fortress Britain. We're going to no longer have all these things that we benefited from, our children benefited from, the Erasmus schemes. I remember, I'm old enough to remember what it was like before we joined the EU, and you could go to and from Europe without a visa, and if you were German, as my partner was, You can go on your identity card. You don't even need a passport. I don't know if we're going to get back to these days. And it just highlights again a wee bit where Scotland's needs and priorities are different from England's probably. Our problem was always emigration and having to try and keep our population of young people up. Their problem, well, the way some of them seem to think it is immigration, and they'll do anything to try and stop that. And I don't really know if they're as overcrowded as they think they are, but certainly Scotland is not overcrowded. Scotland is far too empty for its own good, and this can only do us harm.
Now, the other aspect here, of course, is, as you say, harm. The economic damage was one of the main points that
Yeah.
Alison Thulis focused on there. I read that figure out twice. It's astonishing to me that 1,000 million, 100,000 million, 100 billion has been taken off the UK economy. So presumably the Scottish share of that would be about 9 billion. But I don't know if you've noticed it yourself, but getting out recently in the nice weather, you find a lot of businesses out in the countryside and out the Highlands are not opening very long, or they're not running full service. They're not open a couple of days a week. So that's Brexit, isn't it? I've seen before,
Yeah.
years before, you used to see lots of people from Europe working in the pubs and hotels up the Highlands. So it really is damaging those businesses very directly. Have you seen that yourself?
Yes, even in Glasgow. I mean, tried to go to a restaurant which well, I was trying to meet my daughter at the restaurant, and it was supposed to be open every day except Monday. We went on a Tuesday and it was shut with no explanation. I'm assuming it was lack of staff. This is the thing that hits the hospitality trade very much. I've been gone into a cafe to have a coffee, and there's only been one lady sitting there at the counter saying, "Sorry, we can only do takeaway because we don't have the staff." And particularly coupled with, of course, COVID, one member of the staff has to isolate. Maybe they all have to isolate, and then you can't get the staff anyway, and they drift away. I don't know, from growing up all through my childhood, we tended to see the problem as unemployment. Now the problem seems to be that you can't get the staff at all. Maybe partly to do with low wages, but certainly Brexit is very much at the bottom of this too.
Yes,
Um,
that's
the,
anecdotal evidence, if you like, but you and me have
right,
certainly seen it on many occasions that there's just not enough staff to run the full service that businesses would like in hospitality. Now, let's move on. You talked about wages there. So, of course, this week sees UK-wide public sector strikes on wages. Most public sector workers should expect a real terms pay cut this year, a UK government minister has said, ahead of the biggest rail strikes in 30 years, with Downing Street warning private employers against giving out pay rises. With inflation feared to potentially rise above 10% by the end of this year, Number 10 urged private sector firms not to hike wages as it would make the issue worse. Simon Clarke, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, said the government would continue to support negotiations between rail companies and unions, but did not have a direct role in trying to prevent the biggest rail strikes in 3 decades, which were due to start tonight. I do think it's important that we send a message this week that industrial action is likely to proceed, and therefore people make sensible preparations now, because there's no point in giving false hope, if you like, that these strikes can be avoided. This is the government minister. At this stage, he said, it's likely that they will proceed. He told the BBC's breakfast programme that ministers have faced calls to do more to try to prevent those 3 planned 24-hour walkouts this week by members of the RMT union after the first of those starts just after midnight Tuesday morning. This will result in 1 in 5 trains only running on strike days, halting services altogether in much of northern and southwestern England and Wales. Striking Network Rail staff in Scotland will see most rail services cancelled across the country. The strike has been called over feared job losses amid restructuring and concerns that inflation forecast to reach 11% this year would mean staff getting a real terms pay cut. Other professions, including teachers, are considering potential action over inflation boosting below inflation pay rises. Mr. Clarke, again for the UK government, said that people should not have what he called unrealistic expectations about pay, and that those in the public and private sectors should brace themselves for a real terms pay cut this year. Okay, so that's the UK government, Mary. Let's first of all talk about the news that we're going to be worse off. Okay, that's the UK government's policy. You're all going to have less money this year. Is he right to say if private sector boosts pay, that's going to lead to a spiral? That's what he's fearing, isn't he? An old 1970s style wages and prices chasing each other, both going up.
Well, I think there should be an awful lot more honesty and openness about wages, and particularly when you come to public services, which the basic public services like transport, energy, yeah, electricity, water, stuff like that. That should be nationalised. I know it largely is in Scotland. It should be nationalised because it should be a public right to have that. But talking about wages, I think I would be in favour of bringing in wage ratio legislation across both the public sector and the private sector. I know for that, obviously, the private sector could only have wage ratio legislation imposed on it by the UK government because wage legislation is reserved to the UK government. Wage ratio legislation means that the top person in any organisation only gets a set multiple of what the bottom person gets within that organisation. So the chief executive officer maybe has 10 times the salary of the toilet cleaner or somebody like that. And that is a constant, which gives the chief executive officer a personal interest in what the lower paid people in the organisation get. I know this has been talked about quite a lot in various areas. It's not really been brought in, except in some places in the public sector, not so much in the private sector. But to me, this kind of openness, people knowing what kind of salaries the top people get and having some say over that, would solve a lot of the fears, would take away a lot of the fears of runaway inflation, of one lot of public servants being given a 10% increase, so all the other public servants ask for it as well, and the private sector ditto. If everybody knew or had an idea of what the top people in the organisation earned and what the bottom people earned, they would be able to do an awful lot more about it. But I certainly don't see this kind of thing happening with this government. Although David Cameron in his time proposed bringing in wage ratio legislation, setting it at something like 12 times for the top person. So there's maybe some hope at some future date. But
Yeah.
to me, that would be the answer to this quite justified, I suppose, fear that give 10% richly deserved, and the others will also say, we richly deserve it too.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what everybody earns to know what everybody deserves.
Yeah, that ratio from the top to the bottom in private organisations, as you say, has certainly stretched in recent years, and
Very much.
in a way, it's
With
not really
bonuses,
justified.
bonuses too.
But the other issue, of course, here is that people who are in powerful trade unions are maybe more in a position to put the government under pressure than all the carers, of course, who we were clapping during the COVID crisis. So, do you think there's more? Would you also say that there's more of should we be looking at some sort of? I'm thinking of 1970s again. Pay policies. Should be more of a levelling up, to use a current phrase, of people in caring services who are certainly not paid anything like as much as typical RMT members.
Yeah. Oh no. I definitely think. I mean, in the public sector, I would say the biggest wage disparity probably is in the care sector, between the top people and the bottom people. But if you take, for instance, well, a lot of the care sector is still privatised, people owning private homes and so on. If you compare their kind of income, I mean, some of them have got accounts in the Cayman Islands and so on. if you compare them to the actual basic care assistant, who's very often an immigrant who's maybe even in fear of falling foul of the immigration. But if you compare the two, then it's just night and day. And when you think that the most essential people in any care organisation is the person who actually puts the patient to bed, gets them up, talks to them, has contact with them, as opposed to the management. It seems to me that the more essential your job is in the public sector, and probably in the private, in fact, certainly in the private sector too, the less you get paid.
Yes,
And
that's right.
a
There
bit of
isn't
honesty
really a. It's very
maybe
difficult
helps.
to argue that there's a correlation between the importance of your job and how much you get for it, says, when it comes to caring sector, certainly. Now, we're going to move on straight on to the next story, which is connected to all this, because we've read today that a charity says that millions are being dragged into the depths of poverty by the cost of living crisis. And this is a report by Christians Against Poverty, CAP, which has revealed that 47% of their clients either sacrificed meals, 45% went without heating, 24% couldn't put the lights on, 46% couldn't afford basic toiletries, and 61% couldn't afford weather-appropriate clothing for themselves or the family. This report also found that more than one-third, that's 36%, of CAP clients had considered or attempted suicide as a way out of debt. The charity has said that the two main reasons for debt are chronically low income and or an unexpected change in circumstances. The SNP has repeated its call for the UK government to bring in a real living wage and to reform the UK social security system to ensure it's a safety net for those who fall into financial hardship. The SNP has also called for the Department of Work and Pensions, that's the DWP, to scrap the debt-inducing 5-week wait for the first universal credit payment, which leads to people taking advance payment loans and instead bring in a non-repayable grant. In Scotland, 42% of CAP clients had a deduction taken from their social security payments from the UK government in order to repay a debt. Commenting, Kirsty Blackman MP, who's the SNP's Works and Pensions spokesperson, said, "This report is a harrowing read. Millions are being pushed into or further into debt, poverty and destitution as the cost of living crisis continues to bite. Yet the UK government refuses to lift a finger." She said, in Scotland, the Scottish Government is using its limited powers and fixed budgets to take action to support people through this Tory-made crisis. They have upgraded benefits, they've doubled the unique Scottish child payment, and are spending £83 million on mitigating the UK government's cruel bedroom tax and benefit cap. In contrast to the DWP, Social Security Scotland does not deduct money from benefits to repay loans. Now, it strikes me, Mary, reading this stuff, that we seem to be moving into the end of the welfare safety net. That's a phrase that was used in that report. Is UK no longer a welfare society where people will be protected from the cradle to the grave?
Well, it certainly seems that way. There's the old saying that, well, Tories or the right wing, let's say, believe to make people work harder at the top, you have to pay them more. At the bottom, you have to pay them less, which is why a lot of people, we're seeing more and more people with multiple jobs. Again, and going back to my childhood, the main reason for unemployment, for not being able to pay your bills and getting into debt, was unemployment. Now it's overemployment and you're still not getting out of debt. There seems to be an attitude again in the UK government that either you don't matter if you're poor, or well, just giving you. I think possibly they're copying America in this. I don't know. I mean, America is very, very bad to people who are poor. I mean, we all know about their health service, but also, well, I don't know how it is now, but in the old days, certainly, if you were unemployed, you generally could just get food stamps, which didn't see you round any more. And in fact, I came across a lady one time who, um, she was having a baby, and in America, and she and her partner and her wee boy, who was to her previous partner, were living in a car because they didn't have a house and they couldn't afford a trailer. So, in order to have her next baby, which was his baby, and paid for, not have to have it in a ditch somewhere, she came back to Scotland and had the baby in Scotland. Um, Meanwhile, what had happened before that, before she left America, they were in a car and living in food stamps, and they got food stamps for him, and they got food stamps for the baby that wasn't even born yet, but no food stamps for her or for her other child who were not US citizens. I mean, I know this is yet another anecdote, and it happened many years ago. I don't know whether this is still the case, but England, the UK government, the UK Tory government tends to follow America in all things. So does the UK Labour government recently. I mean, Tony Blair also followed America in everything. That's what got us into all these wars. But yeah, they follow America rather than Europe. They seem to want to distance themselves from Europe. And Europe, of course, does have more and more. They have the cradle to grave idea that most Europe, I think probably all European countries have some kind of health service, some kind of way to keep you out of starvation. Britain wants to, the UK government wants to not be like Europe. They want to distance themselves from Europe for whatever reason and move more and more towards the American way of governance.
Yeah, so you see that the Tory approach, which after all has been voted for in England but not in Scotland, it does seem to be moving towards individuals. If you're in poverty, it's up to you as an individual to do something about it, to pull yourself up your bootstraps. Would you say, is that really the American type of philosophy which the Tories adopt? Well, let's just move on. Another story that's kind of connected to that. We're going to talk about the Scottish government's rolling out, is that the phrase, of the adult disability payment. This is really an update, and we're talking about the Scottish government having its own approach to social policy. Now, today we can report that people who are living in Angus or North and South Lanarkshire can now apply for the adult disability payment. This new Scottish Government benefit replaces the old UK Government's personal independence payment and provides financial support to people aged between 16 and pension age who are disabled and have a long-term health condition or a terminal illness. People already receiving the PIP, the Personal Independence Payment, or the Disability Living Allowance do not need to make an application for a new adult disability payment. The existing awards will transfer automatically from the DWP to Social Security Scotland. Cases will transfer in stages starting from this summer, and the process is expected to be completed by the end of 2025. The adult disability payment is being introduced in pilot areas ahead of opening nationwide by the 29th of August. It was already successfully introduced in Perth, Dundee and the Western Isles back in March, and further council areas will be introduced in July. I think it moves into Aberdeenshire next. Minister for Social Security Ben McPherson said, "We are taking a positive, responsible and compassionate approach to delivering disability benefits, centering around our principles of dignity, fairness and respect." The adult disability payment is the 12th Scottish benefit to be introduced, and without doubt it's the most complex. People can apply for adult disability payment in the way that suits them best. As well as online and over the phone, local delivery staff can provide pre-application advice and encourage people to take up their entitlements. Mr. McPherson said, "I encourage those who think they could be eligible to check and to apply." So I guess the reason this comes in after the last story is the Scottish Government is clearly trying to make a different approach to social benefits. The whole idea is respect, isn't it? It's to say, this isn't a handout. This isn't us being generous to you. This is something you're entitled to. Do you see it working that way? Have you had any? It's been rolled out already. Have you had any feedback on how it's been going?
I haven't heard any feedback, but I know that the Scottish Government attitude to disability is different from the UK attitude. I know there was, was it last year or something, the Scottish Government included people with terminal illness in the enhanced disability payment, for assessment and so on. I think it all depends on how they assess eligibility, because certainly the UK methods in the past of assessing disability, when they outsourced it to all these private companies who had a target to reach in numbers of people they refused, and well, again, it's anecdotal, but you heard of people having to do really difficult things to prove they were disabled, having to not manage to do really difficult things that maybe people who didn't think of themselves as disabled couldn't have managed either. So I would hope that the Scottish Government would have a more compassionate view of this and a more sympathetic view, and wouldn't make people jump over people with amputations, for instance, have to prove anything at all, really. So I would hope so, and certainly what their attitude to terminally ill people would tend to indicate that.
Yep, so that's the Scottish Government's intention anyway, is that the philosophy behind the new claims is that if it's your entitlement, just claim for it. So let's hope that works out, because as the Minister did say, it's very difficult, very complicated. But the story is today then that if you were receiving personal independence payments or disability living allowance and you're North or South Lanarkshire or Angus, you can now apply for a new Scottish payment. So that's going to be continued rolling out over the rest of the country. Now, our next story takes us across to France, Mary. Now, we were discussing the influence, if you like, of right-wing American politics and trying to reform, that's to say, bring down the costs of public services. And that's maybe President Emmanuel Macron's strategy. But it wasn't a huge success, because the second part of the French parliamentary elections was yesterday, conducted over 2 weeks, and the outcome is that France's left-leaning parties, which jointly campaigned as a NUPES alliance for Sunday's parliamentary election, should now form one group to become the second largest in the National Assembly. This is after President Emmanuel Macron's central-right group they are the first group in the parliament, and the NUPES left-wing alliance is the second group. That's according to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who leads the second group. Mr. Mélenchon, who's a left-wing veteran campaigner, told reporters that his suggestion was mainly based on the fact that separately the far left, which is the Communists, the Socialists and the Greens, together forming the NUPES alliance, would have more members than the far right, but they would have fewer members separately. France's Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne is facing calls for her resignation after Emmanuel Macron's centrist alliance lost its absolute majority. Madame Borne, who was appointed only a month ago, said that the result creates an unusual situation that poses a risk for our country, as she put it. After 5 years of controlling the Assemblée Nationale, Mr. Macron now faces a challenge on delivering key policies, which include raising the retirement age to 65, Mary, a shake-up of the country's benefits and welfare system. His government will need to seek alliances and compromises to push its members through. President Macron had insisted before the election that all ministers who lost their seats would have to stand down. Madame Borne, who escaped having to resign by narrowly winning her own seat in Normandy, said on Sunday night, "The situation is a risk to our country given the challenges we have to face at national and international level. We must draw the consequences of this vote." It's an informal tradition in France that the Prime Minister hands in their resignation after the legislative elections and is then, in most cases, reappointed by the President. Madame Borne, the second female Prime Minister in France, is expected to respect that convention, described as a courtesy resignation. The question then is whether Mr. Macron will reappoint her. President Macron's Ensemble alliance needed 289 seats for a majority in the Assemblée Nationale, but in fact only won 245. Okay, so let's just first roughly go over the arithmetic here. So as we heard, to win an overall majority, Any party would need 289 seats. So the biggest group is Macron's group, which is 245. So first of all, there is a kind of a regular right-wing group, if you like, which was in fact Nicolas Sarkozy's old group. And I think they've got about 60 or 70 seats. So it looks like the most likely thing would be a right-wing alliance between I think they're called the Republicans, aren't they? Sarkozy's old group and Macron's group. They could form a working majority, and he could go ahead and reform social security and put up the pension age and reduce benefits. Does that look like the most likely thing to happen?
It probably does, because otherwise Macron would have to do a battle every single way, every single piece of his legislation he wanted to bring in. He'd have a battle between this pincer movement of Marine Le Pen and then the left wing Nupes. So he's going to have to form some kind of a coalition, I suppose, and it would be with these Republicans. I don't know anything about them at all. They've never been very well. I suppose if they were Sarkozy's old lot, then yeah, we do know about them. Yeah, I suppose that is the way it'll go. It'll be an easiest life for Macron, but it's really good. Yeah, it is interesting, let's say, to see the left wing group doing so well. I don't know how this comes in with the populist movements that they're always having in France, um, the Yellow Jackets, and I mean Macron's program was not really very populist. Certainly, well, lowering taxes would be popular with the top people, but not populist with the ordinary working class people. And the other two or three bits he's got are not populist at all. So maybe with the Conservatives here, the Republicans, he'll be able to get through these unpopular moves, and the Nuppies will just have to bide their time till next time. But next time around will be an interesting election. If Macron does just form a coalition this time around. But you have to remember, I think I saw something about the Republicans actually said they didn't really want to form a coalition. One of their spokespeople said he would rather stay in opposition, because then, of course, they can attack Macron. So who knows, they might not accept being in coalition.
Well, there certainly doesn't seem to be much likelihood of Macron's party forming an alliance with the Nuppies, who, by the way, I've just checked the numbers. The left-wing alliance got 131 seats. So if they do stick together as one political grouping, they certainly are a second group. The other numbers that there's two other statistics I'll give you. First of all, National Rally, which is Marine Le Pen's group, won 89 seats. Now that's a huge increase. I think they had something like 17, I forgot the numbers, but that's a really big increase on their result 5 years ago. So I don't know what their position is on pensions and all that, but the Nuppies want to, well, in fact, Bishop Mélenchon argued for bringing the pension age down to 60. And of course, Macron wants to put it up to 65. I don't know what National Rally would say about that. Do you think there's any odd way that, because they're right-wing populist, is there any way they might end up voting with the left to keep pension ages down? Could some weird alliance like that happen? Well, it wouldn't be an alliance, but would they happen to vote the same way on some issues?
Yeah, I would think, as Hugh McDermott said, where extremes meet. I think there will be quite a few things they'll be in agreement with. And these conservative Republicans that might be Macron's great hope for a coalition, they're I think also they were wanting to stay in opposition. I don't know what their attitude is in foreign policy, possibly just similar to Macron's, but the Nuppies man, the left-wing coalition, want to stand up to Europe a wee bit. And they would probably be a wee bit aligned with Marine Le Pen. I don't think she's all that into being a nationalist and all that. She's probably a bit against the EU. So that would be something she could join up with the Nuppies people on.
Okay, well, we better just move on. So we'll have to see what happens. There's still a lot of unanswered questions about the French government now. Will will the Assembly accept should Elizabeth Bourne be re-nominated? The President nominates the Prime Minister, but effectively she would have to have the support of the Assembly. And maybe Jean-Luc Mélenchon might still have hope to be Prime Minister himself. And I'm going to move on to another story that's arisen today, which is about Kaliningrad. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry has called on Lithuania to reverse its ban on goods prohibited under EU sanctions from transiting Lithuania between Russia and Kaliningrad. The Russian Foreign Ministry described this ban as an openly hostile move, and Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov escalated tensions today by threatening a response to what he said was an illegal move. Kaliningrad is about 800 miles from Moscow and is wedged in between Lithuania to its north and east and Poland to its south. It relies on much of its supplies coming through Lithuania by rail from Russia. Lithuania's Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis said that Moscow was spreading false information and that the state railway service was only enacting the EU sanctions regime, prohibiting the supply of steel or goods made from ore to Russia. I know that. As Landsbergis said that under half of the goods usually supplied by transiting across Lithuania would be covered by the sanctions regime over time, with the ban on steel coming into force on the 17th of June. Goods banned under EU sanctions induced following the Russia's invasion of Ukraine include coal, metals, construction materials and advanced technology. There have been reports of panic buying in Kaliningrad over fear of shortages of goods, which seems to have been prompted by calls for calm by the region's governor, Anton Alikhanov, saying that 2 vessels were already ferrying goods between Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, and that 7 more would be in service by the end of the year. Our ferries will handle all the cargo, he said. Now, Mary, just quickly, when I looked at this story today, I thought, is this an escalation by Lithuania? But looking into the story, I think it's not, it's really. Lithuania is trying to calm down, saying we're just imposing EU sanctions, right? But are the Russians trying to dial up the temperature here and turn this into a trade war with Lithuania?
Well, it could be seen as an expansion of the war into Lithuania, because there have always been hints that Russia never really accepted the Baltic states going their own way after the breakup of the Soviet Union. But I don't really think in this case it is this. I mean, Kaliningrad. I only discovered the existence of Kaliningrad when the Ukraine war started, and I saw it mentioned, and I looked at the map and I saw that there was this wee bit of Russia that's totally cut off from the rest of Russia. Now, at the time of the Soviet Union, that probably didn't matter very much. As I understand it, Kaliningrad, well, the area of Kaliningrad, it's called the Kaliningrad Oblast or something, the whole country there, but it was given to Russia as a bit of Germany after the Second World War. It was handed to Russia to give Russia a port which was ice-free, a port into the Baltic which was ice-free all the year round, because although Russia's such a huge country, it's actually landlocked for bits of the year because the Arctic Sea's all frozen over, and so is the Bering Straits and so on. So yes, they got Kaliningrad as a bit of the defeated Germany, so that they would have a wee outlet into the Baltic. And as long as the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, were all part of the Soviet Union and firmly under the Soviet thumb, that didn't really matter, and Kaliningrad wasn't really cut off. But now it is, totally. And this Ukrainian war, of course, has become an issue for it. This was only a matter of time before sanctions were going to cut Kaliningrad off from Mother Russia. And Lithuania has no choice but to impose the EU sanctions and so on. And so
That's right,
it's caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, Lithuania is, if you like, in the front line there. But as you say, it is actually an EU sanctions regime. It's not a Lithuanian policy, but this idea of saying "don't panic" seems to have provoked exactly that. So yes, I also had a look at the map earlier on. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I found there's a strange bit of Russia that's actually inside the EU. geographically. So thank you, Mary. I didn't realise that it was about the ice-free nature of the port. That's something I hadn't thought of. Okay, let's move on now to. I'll just do this very quickly. Today we see the bidding process to become one of Scotland's two green free ports has closed today. There are 5 bids to become a green free port, and those are Clyde Green Freeport, Aberdeen City and Peterhead, Opportunity Inverness and Cromarty Firth, the Fifth of Forth Green Freeport, and finally the Orkney Green Freeport. Those are 5 bids, 2 of which will be successful. Among the key green port requirements applicants have set out is, first of all, how to support high quality employment opportunities offering good salaries and conditions, how they will create new jobs, how they will attract companies to locate in the area, how fair work practices will be embedded across the green free ports. They would also have to explain how they will contribute towards a just transition and net zero by 2045, in particular through a robust plan to facilitate the decarbonisation within the green free port. Commenting on the bidding process and the next steps, Kate Forbes, Economy Secretary, said, "I'm pleased to see a range of bids have come in from across the country to become a green free port. We expect green free ports to promote regeneration in the areas selected, to create high quality jobs and to enhance our decarbonisation plans in the just transition to a net zero economy. We'll now jointly assess and decide on the winning bids following the rigorous process set out in the agreed joint prospectus, in which each government will have an equal say, and further details of the successful applicants will be set out in the coming months." So these free ports are a result of a negotiation, aren't they, between the UK and the Scottish governments. In England, a number of free ports are going to be created, the kind of tax-free areas. It's sort of like duty-free. But in Scotland, I don't think the Scottish government was really all that wild about the idea in the first place. So the Scottish version of it is to say they have to have a commitment to moving towards net zero. Do you see any advantage in free ports, like a tax-free area anyway? And in fact, do you think the Scottish Government is distinguishing its approach?
Well, a lot of, on the face of it, a lot of what free ports are about is just enhancing the profits of companies that move there. Certainly in England, that's the only bit that's definite, that they will enhance their profits because they won't have to pay any tax on anything, and they get let off things like the employer's part of national insurance and stuff like that, so they can employ more people. Okay, it's a bit like the trickle down theory. If you make the rich people richer, then you make more opportunities for them to create, or you allow them to create more opportunities for the people further down the line. The question, of course, is how much will they actually create opportunities and how much will they just pocket the profits? I think the Scottish version has its heart in the right place insofar as it was forced to do it anyway, because yeah, they're supposed to make undertakings before it's allowed, but it's not really clear how these undertakings will be enforced um, or even
Well, it
observed.
remains. I suppose it remains to be seen, really, how well it's scrutinised and how well the applicants line up against the criteria that the Scottish Government has obviously negotiated. But it is supposed to be about creating good quality long-term jobs and not supposed to be just about avoiding taxes, as you say. I noticed one of the criticisms of free ports in general is that it can be an area where criminal activity could take place if it's an area where ordinary rules don't apply. So I guess, as you say, it depends how well it's going to be enforced and overseen.
Yeah, and well, the scrutiny is all, and it will show in the course of time. I mean, as regards attracting inward investment, I suppose it might do that. Although Scotland's not been too bad with inward investment. I saw that it was one of the areas where there's been most inward investment, second only to the southeast, I think, that's been attracting a lot of inward investment recently, even without these free ports, green free ports. And you don't know how much green free ports is just a kind of mask on what's underneath.
Yeah, and that is one of the criticisms that has been made. in other cases where free ports have been set up, yeah, but that's not really sure what goes on inside them. So let's hope that's going to be properly regulated by the Scottish authorities. So let's move on to the last story now tonight, because we hear today that Ukrainian students whose studies have been disrupted by the war with Russia are being invited to apply for a new scholarship. The University of Edinburgh's Sanctuary Scholarship offers financial and welfare support to doctoral students in war-torn regions. The pilot programme enables students to study in Edinburgh or to undertake short visits to the city or to receive support and mentoring to continue their research studies in their own countries. Students researching engineering, life sciences, physical sciences, medicine and veterinary subjects are eligible to apply. The scheme was created in response to the war in Ukraine, but it's open to any international applicant who is affected by armed conflict. Professor Anthony McCabe, the Dean of Postgraduate Research in Edinburgh University's College of Science and Engineering, said, "The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has had a devastating impact on students, with many suddenly facing an uncertain future. As a University of Sanctuary, we have a strong history in providing a place of refuge and education for those seeking protection from armed conflict. We hope that the Sanctuary Scholarship will enable doctoral students affected by conflict to achieve their academic goals and to feel supported by our community of students and academics here in Edinburgh." So I know that you'll welcome this move. It's an interesting one to me from the point of view of how do you actually get this working. So they're specifically aiming at students for a PhD. Now, you're a researcher, aren't you? I'm not, but a PhD really means a research degree. So do you think it's feasible that a student who was some way through a research programme when the Russians invaded, do you think it's feasible that they might somehow be able to continue that with mentoring and support from Edinburgh, maybe online?
Well, it's certainly a very good idea and a very moral and humane idea. I know I was very, very proud back in the day when the Scottish Government allowed asylum seekers to get free university education the same way as EU students and Scottish students do. That would be undergraduate education. So this is, I suppose, I kind of follow on from this as well, but to the PhD level. Um, I'm trying to think how many could, well, I suppose it depends what they're doing. And there would also be language issues, presumably, but that's always the case with students studying abroad. To me, it's certainly, again, it's one of these policies that makes me quite proud of the Scottish Government doing this kind of thing. We'll have to wait and see how many applicants there are and
Yep.
how well it works. And of course, how long the Ukrainians are going to be with us, we don't really know how. All of them, in fact, say that as soon as things calm down back home, they want to go home. But I know there are more and more of them coming here, and we don't know how long the war's going to go on. I mean, I personally know several different people who are
Yep.
known to each other who've taken in Ukrainian refugees, so there are a lot coming in.
Yep. So yes, of course, as we said earlier on, the war is not expected to be over any time soon. So that last story was on the Edinburgh University Sanctuary Scholarship Scheme. So that's specifically for research students who have had their researches interrupted from any war, any conflict, anywhere, but particularly aimed at research students from Ukraine. Well, that's it for tonight. So that was Scotland at 7. So thank you for watching Monday's programme. Andrew will give you the news tomorrow. It's for me and Mary McCabe. It's great to have you on the programme, first of all, Mary, so thank you for joining me. Now, I'd also like to just finish up looking at our appeal. We have, of course, over the last couple of weeks been running our emergency appeal because our income has been falling short of the very large bills to be paid. And I'm delighted to say, just checking online now, we have actually achieved a massive total of £13,005, just going over 13,000 this evening. So thank you for everyone who's contributed. That really is tremendous. We really do appreciate your help. Now, we did have an emergency appeal of 20,000, but I think we're confident we can keep going at the moment. But what we want to do now, and is to move on to expanding the number of people who are watching the programme. So we're grateful to have Mary joining us tonight. So please spread the word yourself, Mary, if you know anyone else who would like to watch. And in particular, if you look at the link below on the screen, www.broadcastingscotland.scot, we really need to sign up more people. You can begin being one of our supporters just at £5 a month. And if we can get another 100 or 200 people in over the next couple of months to support us, we will increase the number of programmes. It's as simple as that. The more money it comes in, the more we will be able to do for you. So we know now from the Scottish Government they intend to have the independence referendum in October next year. So that means we've got a lot of talking to do. The first briefing document is out, of course, and more will follow. Now, we think it's very important, I expect you do as well, Mary, that's why you're joining us tonight. It's very important that we have independent comments which come from a Scottish-based broadcaster, because we don't really have another one, do we, Mary? The other broadcasters are London-based. And so I guess that's why you're on. So I don't have time to go on about it any further tonight, Mary. But so first of all, thanks to everyone who's contributed to our emergency fundraising appeal. The response has been great. But secondly, let's get more people watching and contributing to Broadcasting Scotland, so that we do have a clear independent voice and independent scrutiny of the various arguments we're going to have between now and next October. Okay, so finally, thank you to Mary McCabe for joining us from Denniston. And I hope we'll see you again, Mary. And thank you for watching. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Goodbye.